It is that time of year once again, postseason play. The year has flown by because of this 2020 regular season, and I'm joined by reporter Michael Roth here for the 740 Zone Playoff Preview, and that starts right now. We start off our playoff preview show with Division III Region 11, which includes teams like Athens, Jackson, and Granville. And of course, we got a lot of really tough teams in this region alone. Who are some of those teams you need to look out for?
Yeah, so starting off, the top team in the 740 in this region are the Sheridan Generals. The Generals went unbeaten through MVL play, had a signature win, shutout over the 10th seed Tri-Valley Scotties, but they were not given the 1 or the 2 seed. St. Francis de Sales was given the number 1 seed, and Bishop Hartley, both two teams out of the Columbus area, given the 1 and the 2 seed. So if Sheridan was going to make it to the regional semis, they're going to be on the road. A couple other interesting things to look out for near the top of the division. The 4 seed, Jonathan Alder, they just beat the 5 seed London in a battle of 2 unbeatens. They could rematch in the regional quarterfinals. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out.
Right, you kind of mentioned a little bit in your analysis right there how there could be some of our teams meeting up yet again in rematches. What are some interesting second round matchups we could see from this very tough region?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in seeing the Granville versus Eastmoor matchup. Columbus Public Schools weren't starting until week 4 of the regular season, so Eastmoor only has 3 regular season games under their belt. They have a bye week this week, so I'm not sure if there are any plans for them to play in week 7. But Eastmoor, they only have 3 games, but they're unbeaten. And Granville, we saw them lose 2 heartbreakers this year. One to Waverly, who was ranked top 10 in the state in Division 4, and another one to Licking Valley, who was given the 2nd seed in their Division 4 region. So maybe they can make some noise. And then the other marquee second round matchup involves 2 teams from the 740. Both of these teams finished 2nd in their conference, and that's the Jackson Ironmen and the Tri-Valley Scotties. These 2 teams have a lot of historic playoff success, and it's going to be a battle between senior leadership and more underclassmen. You know, Tri-Valley, they got guys like Aiden Fritter, Blake Sands. Senior leadership, Jackson, they have freshman running back Cade Wolford, who does a lot, junior running back Evan Spires, sophomore quarterback Jacob Winters. So that's going to be a pretty interesting dynamic with a bunch of these Jackson Ironmen playing in what is one of their first playoff games, alongside obviously senior Traylon Davis.
Right, and you know, we've kind of talked about it a little bit. There have been some teams that we knew were going to be here at this point, and other teams who kind of surprised their way into this. And I think one of the teams we really talked about last week was Chillicothe, kind of finding that way to finish out the season and winning that big game against Jackson. Who are some other Cinderella teams in this region that you could see?
Yeah, I would say Chillicothe is the number 1 answer. They were probably the team least benefited by the coaches voting after week 5 because, you know, Chillicothe, they lost that week 1 game to Wheelersburg, and they played the rest of the FAC besides Jackson, which, let's be honest, it's not the toughest conference outside of Chillicothe and Jackson. And then the Cavaliers really proved their worth by having a big double overtime victory over Jackson, but obviously that game wasn't factored in to the coaches voting. So the Cavaliers are sitting, they have the 13th seed. I believe they play against another FAC opponent. I believe it is Miami Trace. And if they win that game, I think they're going to have a trip up north to take on Jonathan Alder. So that would be interesting. Chillicothe not playing like a normal 13 seed for this region. We'll see if they can maybe make some noise against an unbeaten team.
Now we head over to Division III Region 9, where only one of our teams that we've really covered all season is in this region, in Steubenville, and they took on Youngstown East, of course. But we've also seen New Philadelphia as well throughout the season. But how do you think this bracket's going to play out?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting region, you know, mostly Northeast Ohio teams, but based on where Steubenville falls in the state, they're placed into this region. And, you know, you mentioned New Philadelphia. They're the 4th seed. Their actual only loss of the regular season was to the 3 seed in Canfield. And then you look at the 2 seed, Streetsboro. They went unbeaten in the regular season, and they're likely going to match up with the Big Red if Steubenville is able to beat, which would most likely be Dover in a second round matchup. Streetsboro has an Ohio State commit in Mike Hall on the defensive line. He's ranked the 54 ranked player in the nation, according to 24/7 Sports. He broke his hand in mid-September, but is expected to be back for the playoffs. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see if Steubenville does get past Youngstown East and Dover, how they're going to match up with big Mike Hall, because Steubenville is known for being tough in the trenches.
Now we move on to Division IV Region 15. 9 of the 10 top seeds in this region are from the 740 zone, including teams like Bloom Carroll and St. Clairsville. So Michael, you know, coming into this, how good do you think some of these teams could really be into this region?
Yeah, there are some very strong teams in this region. You mentioned St. Clairsville. They're ranked second in the state, in the whole state for Division 4. I got to see them in week 6, and they kind of took it to Harrison Central. You know, Harrison Central has the stud quarterback in Kobe Mitchell, but that St. Clairsville defense really got the job done in the second half. They proved why they're one of the best teams in the state. That number 2 seed, Licking Valley, you know, they've been tough. I believe they've made it to the Final Four the past 3 years. So they are a team, when postseason comes around, they're always ready to go. So you know they're going to be a tough out. A team with that much playoff success. And then you mentioned Bloom Carroll. They have a stout defense. They're likely going to play the only non-740 team in the top 10 seeds in the regional quarterfinals. That would be Columbus Marion Franklin. And then, you know, we're also excited for the 4-5 matchup that could be brewing in Meadowbrook and Gallia Academy. We weren't able to get out to Meadowbrook all year. We had a little bit of car difficulties, which cost us going to their games. But, you know, they ran through the MVL small division, and Gallia, besides a blowout loss to Ironton, who we know one of the best teams in Division 5 in the state, they've looked really good. They've gotten a win over Wellston, a win over Fairland, so that'll be pretty interesting.
Right. You know, we've talked about these top teams a lot, but, you know, there are some teams on the lower end of this bracket, too, that we've seen before, like Vinton County's one of them that's in this region. So who could be kind of a Cinderella from this bracket?
Yeah, so I think the 7 through 10 seeds are all pretty strong. You look at the 7th seed, that's Heath. We saw them, and they got a pretty big-time victory over Johnstown Monroe. Unfortunately for the Bulldogs, they had a pretty bad loss to Zanesville in Week 5, right before the coaches were ready on voting. If they would have won that game, I bet you that the Heath Bulldogs would have been looking at maybe a 5 seed in this region instead of the 7 seed. So they definitely have some talent, and they just wrapped up winning their conference championship. If they're able to get by the 10 seed Cambridge, they're likely going to play Licking Valley, and I'm sure with the proximity of those two schools, they're going to want to get the job done. And then when you look at the 8-9 matchup, it's a big disparity. You know, last season, John Glenn, they made a pretty deep run into the playoffs, and they had a stud wide receiver. And then you got Warren. Warren has never made the playoffs in their program's history. Kurt Taylor, Evan Gandy have been sensational all year. We'll see if that passing attack can do something against John Glenn's pretty ferocious defense. That should be a pretty interesting 8-9 matchup, and the winner of that game would obviously most likely play against St. Clairsville.
Right, so definitely some interesting matchups, of course, coming in. But, you know, down the line into this bracket, what are some of those top marquee matchups that we could be seeing down the line?
Yeah, I mean, we already mentioned a couple of them, but I think St. Clairsville, whoever, if they get past Warren or John Glenn, whoever they play, whether that's Meadowbrook or Gallia Academy, that's going to be a good game. And then, man, I'm really looking forward. If we get that Licking Valley Bloom Carroll matchup, boy, that's going to be a really good one. You know, Bloom Carroll, I think they've only given up 28 points all regular season. We know they got that stout defense. And Licking Valley, we saw them take a pretty shocking loss to a Division 7 school, but they've seemed to right the ship. They got a young team, so we'll see if that young talent is ready for prime time against a very disciplined Bloom Carroll squad. Those would be two pretty sensational regional semifinal matchups. And then the winner of that spot for a Final Four, man, it's going to be pretty fun.
And now we move on over to more my neck of the woods, Division 4 Region 16. Of course, if you don't know, I am from the Cincinnati area, so a lot of the teams like McNick and Batavia are some teams that I've seen around that area, but the one that the 740 zone is really into this year is Waverly, the 4 seed in that region. So how do you think this could really play out?
Yeah, this is going to be very interesting for Waverly being matched up with a bunch of teams from the Cincinnati area. You know, you got the number 1 seed, Clinton Massey. They might have the most explosive offense in all of Division 4 in the entire state of Ohio. I believe they have not been held to under 40 points in the entire regular season, so you know they can put up points in a hurry. And then 2 and 3 seed conference rivals Indian Hill and also Wyoming, so that's going to be interesting. They didn't get to play each other in the regular season. You know, I found that kind of unique that the top 2 schools in the league didn't play each other in the regular season, but now it's looking very likely like they're going to play each other in the playoffs. And then, yeah, you mentioned it, the 4 seed Waverly. That's who we care about in the 740. They had a fantastic season, finally beating Wheelersburg and capturing the SOC2 conference championship. They're likely going to be looking at a game against McNick. And boy, that's going to be a tall task for Waverly. But the one benefit that they're going to have, if they win their second round game, they're going to be at home against McNick. That's going to be a pretty far drive. I bet you a lot of those kids from McNick aren't going to be used to playing in an area like Waverly. So we'll see if maybe the home field advantage can help propel that high-powered Waverly offense, which should be a very entertaining regional quarterfinal game.
And now we keep chugging along in this playoff preview with Division 5, Region 19, and we have a bunch of 740 zone teams in this region alone, including some of the top teams like Wheelersburg and Ironton, and even lower teams like Meigs and Wellston as well. So how do you really think this region is really going to play out as we get into the postseason play?
This region looks eerily similar to last year. Last year, Ironton was able to win the region. They defeated Ridgewood in the regional finals. Ridgewood in the regional semifinals defeated Wheelersburg on the other side, and that could play out exactly the same this year. Obviously, Wheelersburg and Ridgewood are going to look to shake things up this year in the playoffs, but again, Ironton's the favorite. Reed Carrico, potential Mr. Ohio for the state of Ohio, or Mr. Football for the state of Ohio, excuse me. He's going to be looking to get Ironton back to that state title game. And this region, between those three teams, those are three of the top teams in all of the 7-4-0. So it's going to be interesting seeing them battle it out. And the 4, 5, and 6 seed, they're all from the Columbus area. So it's kind of going to be 7-4-0 versus 6-1-4. It'll be interesting dynamic to see how that plays out.
Right, and you kind of already talked about it. This region is a lot like how it was last year. And, some of those big teams are back. They're ready to get back into it. So are those some of the matchups that you're still looking for, or are there other ones that we're not really talking about enough?
Yeah, the next two games I'm going to bring up, they're going to have quite a big difference because the 7 versus 10 matchup, the 7 seed went 0-10 last year, and that would be Liberty Union. Obviously, they turned things around completely, going 5-1. They earned that number 7 seed. They're going to take on Amanda Clear Creek most likely in the second round of the playoffs, and then that 8 versus 9 matchup is going to be very interesting. Wellston back in the playoffs for a second straight year. Everybody makes it, but still, they had a solid season, and they're likely going to play against Johnstown Monroe. Johnstown's a team that we saw lose to Heath, so it's going to be interesting to see how Wellston, a TVC Ohio squad, fares up a little bit further north in that around the Columbus area, but Johnstown is also a 7-4-0 zone team, so I would say those two matchups are what we're really looking forward to in potentially the second round of the playoffs.
Right, and those matchups are very interesting, but are there any teams that you could see going up against maybe some of those top teams and maybe getting a game in against them, maybe not winning exactly, but making it definitely a game?
I don't see anybody coming close to competing with Ironton or Ridgewood outside of maybe the top 6 seeds. I think that those two teams are just so strong. They're just so balanced. You saw Ridgewood. They played another top 10 team in their division, and they beat them 36-0. That's a team that's on a mission. Wheelersburg, even though they had that loss to Waverly, look what they did to Chillicothe, the FAC champions. They shut them out 31-0. And then Ironton, nobody's been able to touch them. They just played a Division I team from Cincinnati, beat them by more points than every other team in their league did, besides undefeated Lakota West, who's ranked top 5 in the state. So this region, those 3 teams are so strong. It's going to be so interesting to see how it plays out with those 3 teams at the end. I just hope we get to see those 7-4-0 zone teams be able to match up a team like Columbus Academy. They're going to be looking to shake things up, and they're very talented as well. But obviously, us here at the 7-4-0 zone, we want to see those 7-4-0 teams make it all the way to the state semifinals and maybe even lift up a state championship trophy.
In the last region, we saw a lot of 7-4-0 zone teams that are getting ready for postseason play. And in this next region, we only see a couple, but here in Division 5, Region 17, we have Belair and Martins Ferry going up against some of the top seeds in this region. So who are some of those top seeds that they have to look out for?
Yeah, so it's really 2 teams that they're going to have to look out for, and that's the number 1 seed, Kirtland. They are widely regarded as the top team in all of Division 5 in the entire state of Ohio, and who can blame them? I believe they have the longest winning streak in the state of Ohio right now. They won the state championship last year. This season, what an encore by Kirtland in the regular season. Not only did they get their first win over a Division I school in Shaker Heights, but then they took on perennial playoff Division I team in Solon, and they beat them 28-7. What else can you just say about Kirtland? They're going to be a tall task for anyone in Division 5 to beat, not just our 5th seed Bel Air and 8th seed Martins Ferry. Those are going to be 2 teams that, if everything goes right for them, they're going to have to go through Kirtland. That's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, and there are those top teams that we already know are going to be probably there at the end, but who are some teams that you could see possibly busting some brackets as we get into this postseason play?
I would say the team that fits that description the best, it's from the 7-4-0, and that's Harrison Central. Kobe Mitchell is a special playmaker. I got to see him against the top team in actually the number 2 team in Division 4 in the St. Clairsville Red Devils, and in the first half, he kept his team in the game. It's going to be pretty interesting to see, because if Harrison Central can win their first round game, they're going to play the number 2 seed South Range out of Canfield, and I don't think that Harrison Central, I wouldn't want to call a 15 seed being a 2 seed, but if that did happen, it would not completely stun me. So I think if you're looking for a bracket buster in this region, Harrison Central, led by Kobe Mitchell, that's going to be the team that could break some brackets.
Now we keep the train rolling. We move on to Division 6, Region 23, where 6 of the top 8 seeds in this region are from the 740 zone, including the number 1 seed in Fort Fry. And you know, these top seeds, of course, are going to be dominant as they usually are in this postseason play. But who are some other teams to really look out for in this region?
I think that the number 1 team that you want to look out for that can make some noise is the Nelsonville York Buckeyes. They had a pretty tough start to the season, losing to Trimble in a close one, and then kind of getting beat pretty soundly by the Wellston Golden Rockets in week 2. But since then, the Buckeyes have reeled off 4 straight victories. They're playing their best football of the season right now, and if they win their first round game, they're likely going to play the 3 seed, which is Fairland, and Fairland has never won a playoff game, so that's going to be an interesting dynamic. You know, Nelsonville York, they've been here before. They made it to the state semifinals less than 4 years ago, and then you got Fairland, who is the higher seeded team. They had a great season, but they haven't done it in the playoffs yet, so that's going to be a pretty interesting dynamic if we get that in the regional quarterfinals.
Right, and you know, you kind of talked about Nelsonville York. I've had the good fortune of being at some of those games, and early on in the season, you kind of said it. They really struggled out of the gate, getting a new quarterback used to things, but that defense is legit, and I really do think they could definitely make some noise in this region as well. But you know, what are some of the other matchups that you're kind of looking for in this region, not only just from the Buckeyes?
I would say that Fort Fry versus Afrocentric is going to be a pretty fascinating matchup. Afrocentric, they've never made the playoffs, and obviously, I mentioned this before, Columbus City League, they only got 3 regular season games, and this is going to be Fort Fry team. They're balanced, probably win with a lot of power, where Afrocentric, they're going to try and get you on the outside, win with their speed, so that'll be an interesting dynamic. Afrocentric's going to throw a little bit of a different wrinkle if Afrocentric is able to beat the number 9 seed and advance to play Fort Fry. And then Centerburg, that's another team that I'm really interested to see how they fare in the playoffs. We weren't able to see them in the regular season, but they went undefeated, won their conference championship. They're ranked in the top 10 in the state for Division 6. I'm excited to see them. I'm planning on seeing them against either the 7 or the 10 seed in the regional quarterfinals. And that's going to be a team, you know, maybe we see them against the likes of Fairland, Nelsonville York, or even Fort Fry in the later rounds of this region. So we could become actually very familiar with Centerburg by the time it's all said and done.
Right. We've been talking about Cinderella stories throughout really this whole entire episode. And, you know, I don't know if you could really call a 6 seed the Cinderella story, but are the Buckeyes your pick for being kind of a Cinderella through this, or is there another team that you're kind of looking at?
You know, I think the Buckeyes could be it, but I actually do think that the top 3 seeds are pretty strong, and I think that they're probably all going to make it to the regional semifinals. So I think the Buckeyes have the best chance out of anybody, mostly because I feel really good about Fort Fry and Centerburg. Fairland, you know, they had a great story. The one game we saw them this year, they put up 43 points against Gallia, but that defense did give up 47. So as much of a great story that Fairland has been this year, they probably have the most questions to answer among the top 3 seeds, but that's no disrespect to Fairland. You know, they only lost 1 time this year, and they earned their place in the Division 6 state poll during the time that they were in it. So that's going to be a matchup that I'm very excited to see. I probably would end up picking the Dragons, but I think the Buckeyes have a pretty good shot of winning.
Now we move on to Division 6, Region 24, where we have 2 teams from the 740 zone in Paint Valley and, of course, Adena as well coming into this one. But what is this region kind of shaping up to look like?
Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting region. You know, a bunch of these teams are from kind of the outer Dayton area, so Adena is not really going to be used to seeing these teams in the regular season alongside Paint Valley. You know, those 2 teams faced each other in week 1 of the regular season. Adena was able to put up 50 points, and they really haven't looked back after that game all regular season. It's going to be interesting to see because the Warriors are ranked pretty highly in Division 6 across the entire state, but they were given the 3 seed. It looks like Mechanicsburg is going to be a team that we might get familiar with because if Paint Valley can defeat the number 10 seed, they're likely going to play Mechanicsburg. And then if Adena is able to make it that far and Paint Valley can't pull off the upset, they're going to play Mechanicsburg again in the playoffs. So we might see them go after Mechanicsburg. We might see that conference try their hand twice at defeating Mechanicsburg, who's also very highly ranked. And then the number 1 seed in this region, Coldwater. Them and Fort Fry have kind of been sharing the first place votes in the entire state for Division 6. They rightfully earned that number 1 seed, and I think that they are the team to beat, not only in this region, but across the entire state in Division 6. So if Adena is able to make it to that regional final, very likely they're going to be playing Coldwater, and that's going to be a very tall task for the Warriors. But so far this year, they've been up for it.
Now we move on to the final division and final region in our playoff preview episode. We go Division 7, Region 27, and we have some very good teams from the 7-4-0 zone in this, including the number 1 seed in the region, the Trimble Tomcats. And we've heard a lot about them over the last couple of years, but they're coming into this one with a lot of new faces. So definitely, who are some of the top players in this region?
Yeah, so Trimble is going to have a lot of challenges. We mentioned how young this team is. They won some very close games against double-digit seeds, so by no means are the number 1 seed Trimble Tomcats going to coast through this region. You look at the number 2 seed East Knox, they were finally ranked in the Division 7 state poll, coming in tied for 13th. And then you got number 3 seed River. They recently lost in week 6, so maybe Waterford could actually get an upset of them if Waterford is able to defeat Miller in round 1. And then I think the team that Trimble really has to watch out for is Newark Catholic, the 5 seed. They only went 3-3 in the regular season, but this is no normal 3-3 team. They lost close games to Division 5 power Johnstown Monroe. They lost to Division 2 team in Licking Heights. So this is a Newark Catholic team that has been to the playoffs year after year. They've gone deep, and the coaches gave them a lot of respect because even though they were 2-3 at the time of voting, they were given the 5 seed over a bunch of teams that had only 1 or 2 losses on the year.
Right. You know, when we kind of looked at this bracket, and I think what's really interesting, the top 11 seeds come from the 7-4-0 zone. So that'll definitely lead to a lot of very interesting matchups down the line in the bracket. So who are some of those teams that you can see down the line matching up?
Yeah, I really have 2 sleepers in this region. The first one, Bern Union. Reporter Jacob Mata has been doing some pretty solid coverage on Bern Union so far this year. They got a very impressive victory over Worthington Christian to win the conference championship. They're going to try and ride that momentum. They have Eastern from Pike County, actually, likely in the 8-9 matchup. And, you know, for Bern Union, they just want to ride that momentum from winning that conference championship. Eastern Pike is actually the total opposite because they had a chance to win their conference title in week 5 and they got beat pretty soundly by Northwest, a Division 5 school. So we'll see how maybe they try and bounce back. And the other sleeper team I have are the Eastern Eagles out of Meigs County. It's rockin' in Reedsville, like we like to say, and Eastern is very, very experienced. That's going to be their calling card in these playoffs, and if they win round 1, they're going to get a rematch against Caldwell, a team that beat them in week 1 of the regular season. It'll be interesting to see if Eastern can get some revenge against Caldwell. So really, you're looking at 2 TVC Hawking teams, Waterford and Eastern. I think they're better than their seed is, and also Bern Union. They kind of, like Chillicothe, missed out a little bit with voting after week 5 instead of week 6. So we'll be very intrigued to see how those teams line up because TVC Hawking was very competitive this year. Maybe we see a couple teams make deep runs in the playoffs.
Right, and I think what's really interesting especially is the fact that Trimble is now younger, and I think you're now kind of looking at it and saying, okay, they're not just going to run through like we kind of have expected them to in the last couple of seasons. So it should be a very competitive region, to say the least. And of course, that'll do it for us here at the 7-4-0 Zone Playoff Preview. It's going to be a fun ride, and you should be along for the ride with us as well. This Friday, we'll be out at some of the first round playoff games. And of course, down the line, we'll continue to cover the teams from the 7-4-0 Zone. And I'm your host, Jacob Murray, signing off.